Welcome to Morgan's Game Therapy, a channel where you listen to a random stranger on the internet talk about TTRPGs and give unsolicited advice on problems that don't concern me. I hope your day-night weekend is going well, and I hope you enjoy the video. Today, we're back with yet another sample of RPG horror stories. For anyone confused, in these videos I read stories from Reddit that describe horror experiences from TTRPGs, different systems, a lot of them are D&D related, and talk about them from my perspective as a longtime player and dungeon master. With that out of the way, let's get on with reading the stories. Today's session was what happens when someone who has no clue what physics is tries to write a sci-fi by Wrong Kami. Friend has toyed around with the idea of a scientific discovery with no equal. So, after some good rolls and landing on a virgin planet, I asked him to tell me what he wanted to discover and to be creative. He came up with a fungus that could deliver 20 times the electricity that you put in, and that could store energy with no apparent upper limit. In my mind, I was like, you just discovered a black hole creator. Because if someone can store energy within itself without limit and make it at the same time produce more energy than it puts in, it breaks conservation of energy and in fact can achieve critical mass to create a star or even a black hole. I kept that in the back of my mind, so I could use it later, because he wanted to commercialize this untested, unstudied fungus as an alternative energy source / food source. The fungus was also edible. Now, fast forward some sessions, someone from GDCO comes to assess this asset and make an offer. At first, they're laughing all the way back to the player's type S because, of course, this is snake oil, a perpetual motion machine. But after actually studying this thing, they come out of the lab pale as a sheet, panting, in horror, telling them to burn this thing, bury it, and let no one discover it. Basically explaining that if you hook an amp to it, it gives back 20 amps. What's stopping you from closing the loop and causing a feedback that would eventually create a critical mass and just basically erase an entire system? And what's keeping a malicious agent from just cultivating these things and spreading them around the empire and massacring everyone? It only needs basically a couple of cables and an AA battery. Now, here comes the kicker. My friend is looking at me in this scene like I'm talking about fantasy. I tell him if he understands that energy is the same as mass. He says he doesn't. I explain it to him and basically tell him that it's been a hair's chance every time they tested this thing that it could have gone critical and ended them all. And it's not like they don't have money. They have plenty to go around. But he's been obsessed with this thing since the beginning. So we start a back and forth. Every time I explain to him how this could potentially be dangerous, he moves the goalpost, saying I'm misremembering how this thing works and backtracking to change it. He ends up basically with a biological transformer. I get really annoyed, finish the scene half-heartedly, and tell him I don't want to continue the session. It has been, honestly, a bad session anyways. 2 of the 4 players couldn't show up, and the only other player that did was falling asleep and barely even talked. So, yeah, whatever. Maybe it was my fault for allowing some outlandish discovery, but I hate when people make things up and don't think of the implications. Oh boy, okay, this story is right up my alley. You see, I, Morgan, am a scientist. A biologist, specifically, with the degree and a job in the field and all. Mind, nothing I do has anything to do with physics, but you get my point. I know some science. And this, dear listeners, is a classic example of someone who doesn't understand what science fiction is. Okay, sarcasm aside, I think the DM is being extremely inflexible here for no real reason that I can see, and passing it off as someone not understanding how physics works. I understand that world building is important to DMs. It is very important to me. But this line right here, I tell him if he understands that energy is the same as mass. He says he doesn't. I explain it to him and basically tell him that it's been a hair's chance every time they tested this thing that it could have gone critical and ended them all. That sounds very entitled to me. First, I don't expect that I need to brush up on my Einstein every time I attend a sci-fi game. I think expecting someone to master a whole new subject just to play a game is ridiculous. before I get carried away huffing about it, my basic point is let your players have their cool thing. Yes, most of their ideas will likely be extremely impractical and nigh unrealistic, but so is 99% of science fiction and popular media. Star Trek, Star Wars. You think any of those wouldn't have a physicist foaming at the mouth if they really set out to point out all the theory holes in them? Of course they would. But that's the point of fantasy, to imagine things we can't achieve here and now, and maybe won't ever achieve because they're impractical and impossible, but it's fun to imagine and pretend we actually could do these things. Besides, as a few commenters point out, the quote-unquote you invented something weird that can mess with energy and bend reality isn't a novel concept at all, and certainly not something we should be all uppity about. Just let your player have this. Their argument at the end, to me, seemed like a player trying to explain how their cool thing would be plausible when the DM was trying to take it away from them, with literally telling them to burn their cool thing. DMs, if you don't think something is a good idea, or it just doesn't work in your world, tell your players that. Be honest. Just say no. If you really must, if you really can't work it in. Otherwise, just work with them. But giving your players false hope by letting them have their cool thing, only to then turn it around and tell them they have to destroy it because it's bad and there's no way to make it not bad, that's mean. Instead, work with your players. A lot of people in the comments of this story were saying that as the DM, the person with absolute authority of the world, the literal god of this universe that they created, the OP could have absolutely turned this fungus into a plot point, played it in a way that still made the player feel cool and empowered. Perhaps let their character discover this potential danger of the fungus and go on a long-term quest to find a way to stabilize it or limit its potential in a way that makes it functional but not a potential threat to everyone. I think that would have been a fun plotline that very much fits into the classic sci-fi concept. And if it broke some basic laws of physics, who cares? Reality is probably fake anyways, and physics is all invented. It is especially invented in a world you made up, because that world isn't real, as much as we want it to be. And lastly, before we move on, I want to address a small point at the end of the post that bothered me, maybe more, slightly more than the actual pointing out physics to make someone feel dumb thing. This line. It has honestly been a shit session anyway. 2 of the 4 players couldn't show up, and the only other player that did was falling asleep and barely even talked. My question to you, OP, on the very, very small chance that you actually see this, because I don't know if anyone actually wants to listen to me talk into the void, is this: why are you running a session you're not happy or wanting to run? I personally have a rule that I won't run sessions when more than a quarter of my players are missing, and sometimes I postpone even if 1 player is not available. I understand that might not be an option for some people because scheduling is an absolute nightmare, but running something with only 2 people places a lot of burden on them. If one of the 2 isn't very expressive or is uninterested, like the post mentioned, this is just you doing one-on-one RP with 1 player. If you aren't up for that, just don't do it. It feels like the OP was already annoyed from the start and let out their frustration on the only player actually participating by making them feel stupid over fungus. To the player who invented this fungus energy sponge, I hope you find a better DM that appreciates you and your ideas. If it helps at all, I think your fungus is very cool. Trigger warning for gore, in-game dismemberment, in-game animal abuse. When I was a new player, my party cut off me and my pet bear's arms. Content warning: in-game abuse and coercion, uncomfortable themes, violence, and power imbalance by Sunee-Bored-Posting. I've been watching a lot of D&D content recently after the release of Baldur's Gate, as it reignited my long-lost love for RPGs, and it meant a lot of horror stories coming across my For You page. After watching a few of these, I started to realize that an experience I had in my first ever D&D game maybe wasn't as normal as I was led to believe at the time. I'm still not convinced this counts, and maybe this whole thing is my fault somehow, but I thought this story was worth telling anyway. This is my first post here, /like this, so sorry for some formatting errors. Background info. So, several years ago, I met this guy, and we really hit it off. I was just getting out of a pretty abusive relationship, and this guy, we'll call him Don, decided to move in together and started dating. Don loved D&D, and had a consistent group that met twice a week at their homes, and he invited me to come and learn D&D. I had previously been into LARP when I was younger, so I was more than excited to give D&D a try. Note, this is all over the course of a nearly 17-hour session. All names in the story are fake names, though if they see this post, I'm sure they'll recognize it regardless. So we go for our first game, and when we get to his friend's house, I'm let in. We want to be starting a new campaign, but they'll be adding me to their current ongoing campaign, which doesn't bother me much until I'm told I'll be starting at level 1. Don tries to argue that I should at minimum start at level 5 or so, but the DM, who we'll just call John or DM, says that since I'm new, he doesn't want to overwhelm me. So, in their max level 3.5 game they've had going for around 2 years, I'm a level 1 halfling druid, I think. And while this sucks, I'm pretty appreciative to even be allowed to play. In general, the story is as follows. The party is a highly homebrewed, chaotic, evil group of pirates, traveling the world and doing evil acts in the name of Umberlee. They have a giant flying pirate ship that's also apparently a person, ? A lot of the details are lost on me as so much time has passed, and we didn't play this game much longer after this. The group consisted of myself, Don, no memory of what his character was other that he could cast a lot of lightning spells, John, the DM, but had some insert characters, Tina, our high priestess of Umberlee, I think they're a cleric, and her husband Woody. Also don't know their class, but I assume it was some kind of fighter. And when I'm added to the party, I am one of their slaves, as they regularly kept from their adventures. We go on a couple of smaller adventures, and the ship is attacked often by pretty high-level monsters. Almost every encounter I am forced to sit and hide, or cast one low-level spell and pretend I'm helping. And every time there isn't a fight going on, I am fully living the life of a slave on an evil ship, having a collar put on my character that would immediately explode her head should she not follow an order, and given a number rather than a name. There was a lot of stuff uncomfortable about this, being a slave to a bunch of people I don't know. The amount of times that this story has made me so mad that I had to redo entire sections is astounding. So if my speech is jumbled in some parts, I am sorry. I just can't edit out any more than I already did. I need to get through this story because it's making me so upset. Okay, first series of red flags, right there, bright and crimson. Starting off a new player with a level 1 PC might sound like a good idea, and out of context, it is. I would even recommend doing so instead of doing the usual start at level 3 thing that many people in D&D do, since it lets people learn mechanics without being bogged down by all the extra stuff. However, in big capital letters, here we see a classic case of power imbalance between the new player and the rest of the group. Not only does the new player have less knowledge of the game and their abilities, but now they're also many levels below the rest of the party. Quite literally, they're level 20, she's level 1. This makes the new player a liability at best, since they're now completely useless against monsters of the party's level, and at worst, they can be taken advantage of rather easily by the more powerful players. I don't even know how to address the whole your character is the slave of the evil party, given a number instead of a name, with a collar around your neck that explodes. This, I think I don't need to explain exactly why this is a terrible idea. I think anyone with any semblance of compassion and common sense and decency would know why this is a bad idea. And I think it's pretty evident early on that this is first not normal, and second, they're just using this to, I don't know, get off their their sadism kinks. Just a fucking group of weirdos, man. Anyways, continuing with the story. I tried to worm my way into adventures as best I could, and Wood eventually found me useful to bring with them on adventures, since I made a very good improvised weapon to throw. On our second or third adventure, I realized that I just wasn't going to be useful here and became basically a summoner. Every encounter I would cast Summon Nature's Ally and summon a random animal native to the land we were on. On our second-ish time out, the DM said that this time I summoned a celestial dire bear, who I immediately fell in love with, as it felt like my first accomplishment to summon something so strong. And my party kind of agreed, so Tina cast a permanence spell on it, so that I could now have this bear as an ally forever. This rocked, and we had a ton of really cool and rewarding fights like this. Until around the end of the session. We were heading through a forest, and I had gotten quite confident. So when the others were talking and making jokes, I made jokes too. Woody called me short and weak, so I called his character ugly. It was a small, pretty playful back and forth until everyone stopped, and Dawn had an idea to punish me for back-talking. I would make a much better throwing weapon if I had the arms of the bear. This turned into a pretty bad argument where the whole party was reading their spells and potions and abilities, trying to figure out how they could cut off my bear's arms and attach them to me, while I pleaded and argued that there's no way John would allow this, as I'm a player character. The fight got pretty bad for a minute, until John stated, "They've done worse," and said he would allow it if they could explain. So, a level 20 Priestess of Umberlee cast a sleep spell on my now level 3 halfling druid, and I obviously didn't make the save. They made a whole theater about the process of putting me and my bear to sleep and cutting off my arms and cutting off my bear's arms. I was loosely awake the whole time and could hear my bear fight back, and could watch as they placed his arms where mine had once been, starting at the shoulders. They cast Regenerate on the bear and then on me so the arms would stick. As soon as they were done, I stated, "You know, as soon as I wake up, I'm going to attack you guys, right? I'm going to have to roll a whole new character. I'm not going to let you guys do this to me." To which they laughed and looked at DM, stating they would also cast Memory Wipe on me and my bear, making it metagaming to react. I argued a Memory Wipe wouldn't make the aching stop, or make me not notice that I had the arms of a large celestial bear attached to me that I didn't have before. So they rolled Persuasion to see if they could convince me I had always been like this. And I lost, of course. I wanted to be a good sport about the whole thing, so we continued to play until the end of the session, where I basically roleplayed a brain-dead halfling, while my DM explained in detail how hard and uncomfortable life as a small creature with arms twice the size of my body, and how I could barely walk due to it as well, cutting my movement in half if I walked on my legs, and doubling it if I used my arms as legs. The session ended shortly after, and everyone was laughing and having a great time, and then I went home. I didn't go to the next few sessions, but I did eventually return to their games once they started a new campaign. This behavior never stopped, and I have a ton of stories about this group that span over the course of around 2 years. Maybe I'll tell more later, but for now, this was the worst one. TLDR. For my first ever session, I joined a D&D campaign with an evil pirate group. I became a slave, summoned a powerful bear, and later, my group forcibly amputates my celestial dire bear's arms to attach them to my halfling against my will. The group rolls to convince me I've always had bear arms, and forcibly wipes my memory so I can't react, and the game continues with my character as a brain-damaged halfling with oversized bear arms. Some things to note. I had just met these people for the first time, but they were not strangers either. I had moved in with my new boyfriend, and these were his long-term friends. At the time of this story, I was 18 or 19, and my boyfriend was 29. The rest of the party was around 26. Update. Edit 1. Thank you for all the kind words. I really didn't realize this was such a bad experience. Y'all are pointing stuff out that I didn't even consider all that bad when writing it out. I think this experience has left me with more long-term scars than I initially thought, but all your compassion fills me with hope for the future. I hope I get a chance to come back to D&D at a later date maybe, and see if there is better experiences to be had out there, since I never played with any group other than this one. And I think I'll do some fan art of the old character as a way to get a little closure over it. Thank you guys for helping me through this old scar. Please know I wasn't the perfect person, and I wasn't the perfect player, so while the situation sucked for me, I'm not blameless in this, and I let it go on for far too long. No one's perfect, friends, so look at this post with an eye that this is only my perspective of the situation. Update 2. Decided to draw Twig and her bear as stated above. It was very therapeutic. Thank you to the person who recommended it, and secondarily, someone suggested I give her a new life in a new game. I don't think I ever will, as I associate her too much with that party, but let this be my express permission to all of you to feel free to adopt her and use her and her art for your games as NPCs or PCs. Thanks for the love, guys. This is just awful. I kept trying to find a place to make a second pause to insert some more commentary, but it just kept going and going and getting worse and worse. I was hopeful when OP got her celestial bear and managed to engage with the party, but of course it wouldn't be a horror story if that didn't somehow turn into something incredibly cruel. I would like to start off by saying that it's great that the OP admits that she wasn't the perfect person in this situation. However, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that any player could do to warrant this kind of reaction. It's not the OP's fault in any way, even if she was sassy, snarky, couldn't remember her abilities, the whole 9 yards. There is absolutely no excuse or explanation for this kind of behavior. This is a level of sadism that just should not exist for any reason whatsoever. That being said, this is also exactly what I was talking about with the power disbalance. The rest of the party are level 20. OP is level 3. The divide is extreme. Anyone who's played a level 20 character understands that they have abilities that level 3 characters can't do anything against. They have the wish spell. Literally, the power to bend reality. The divide is too great. No amount of good rolls will help you even those odds. You would have to roll nat 20s in basically everything, and even then, you probably wouldn't succeed. It doesn't help that clearly the DM was in on it and enjoying it at times. Let's try to break down this mess of awfulness into sections so I can concentrate my thoughts, and maybe someone in the future can know what to look out for, even if all of this doesn't happen at the same time in this massive pile of awful. First, OP's character being used as an improvised weapon. This is a funny meme for sure, with Goliaths tossing dwarves at enemies, but the joke assumes that, first, the parties are both equally leveled, and second, that they're both willing participants. The dwarf in the meme is doing the chopping because he has the axes and he wants to murder things, and the Goliath is happy to throw his friend at the enemies because dwarves are slower, and it's funny. Throwing a severely underleveled character into easy reach of the enemies is, and I cannot stress this enough, a bad idea. And in this case, it just feels entirely malicious. Like, there's no point to this. It's just for sadistic amusement. There's absolutely no way these people didn't know what they were doing with this. They're experienced players who got their party to level 20. They know the things I just mentioned. They know that this is cruel and pointless. They're just doing it for funs and giggles. Second, punishment for party banter. I would like to say this first and foremost. OP, the players in your former group were absolute sissies. Only truly pathetic people insult someone in character and then get offended and retaliatory when you, also in character, respond with a similar insult. You called him ugly. That's not that bad. Most likely, they were trying to pick on you as a person through the characters, and when you dared to not cower before them, they retaliated in the cruelest way. And I do mean in the cruelest way. In what world is literal mutilation in animal cruelty an appropriate response to being called ugly? Right? That's not equivalent. That doesn't make sense. It's just a thing because they're angry that you would dare to speak back to them. I get that it's fantasy, but there are some lines that you don't cross, even in make-believe. Besides, this was entirely non-consensual, which by default is a no-no. If anyone in your party does anything against someone else's will, just big red X on that. No. In any decent group, the DM would have put a stop to this idea when the characters voiced it immediately. First thought, banhammer on that idea. However, in this case, we're observing a group of people masking their own terrible and violent fantasies behind a veil of, my character is evil, I'm just being in character. I don't know who needs to hear this, but here's a PSA. You don't need to put up with this kind of behavior. The moment someone crosses a line like this, the moment someone makes you uncomfortable like this, you pack up and leave. Whatever game you're playing, whatever friend group you're in, you're worth more than this, and you don't deserve to put up with that kind of garbage behavior. That got me a little emotional there. Let's move on. I have more points to make. What number was I on? Yes. 3. Memory wiping and persuasion rolls against player characters. This is a big no-no in my games, specifically because I experienced this firsthand, and I know this sucks. It really, really sucks. What's the point of even playing at all if you don't have any agency over your actions? I could just watch a movie at that point. The players are, of course, assholes for doing this. However, I think the DM is the biggest jerk here, seeing as he is in full control of the game. He has all the power to stop this at any point, and he just allowed this to happen. Players, this is something everyone should ask in session 0. Do you allow charisma-based rolls against other players? This is on the same level of importance as asking whether PvP is allowed. And if you're unfortunate enough to witness a situation in your game where the DM allows such rolling to happen, just leave. This shows that the DM is not an unbiased observer. He picks favorites, and his favorites in this case are charisma-based characters, because they will always, almost always, dominate with persuasion rolls. Because of course they would. It's their main stat. They're usually also proficient in it. It's their thing. It's bread and butter. Your life is too valuable to waste listening on a book acted out by someone else when that wasn't what you were promised or what you signed up for. This is a classic case of a group of absolute bastards taking advantage of a young and inexperienced person. OP mentioned they were 18 to 19, while the rest of the group was 26 and Dawn was 29. That in itself created a power imbalance, which was further exacerbated by the difference in character levels. I am a big proponent of people starting out playing with their own age range, because when you are first starting anything, you are much more likely to be taken advantage of. You don't know what you're doing. Not saying that people of different ages can't get along and play well together, it's just that stories like this one are far too common between 18-year-olds and younger, and people in their mid to late 20s. I think people should have the chance to play with their own age range, where everyone is at the same kind of level in life, and then they can move on and now that they have their footing, be able to play with other people on equal grounds. OP, you, on the off chance you will ever hear this, I hope you get back to the game someday and make memories that push these ones to the far recesses of your mind. There is a group out there for you that will love and cherish you and your characters. Your art of Twig and her bear companion is lovely. I will put it in a link down at the bottom. YouTube doesn't allow me to do links, so I'll just put the actual like physical link, the physical copy-paste thing you can do, just in case anyone wants to look at it. It is really good. I hope plenty of people adopt her. I might try to adopt her or try to fit her into my game, into my Pathfinder game at least. I love bears. Bears deserve all the things in the world. And Twig deserves a much better story than the one she was given. Okay, that was a heavy story. I'm going to take a break after this and drink some tea and calm my nerves. Let's do a palate cleanser after this one. Let's end the video with a post that's less a horror story and more of a discussion starter, short and sweet. Profiling by gender when applying to online D&D campaigns by Ocean Rollin. Do you ever get profiled like this when applying to D&D games, where all they seem to be curious about is your gender? Is this a common thing and not really seen as a horror story? Would love to hear your thoughts. OP. Hey, interested in joining your D&D game on Sunday? Black Redacted. Okay, how old are you and what class are you planning to play? OP. 29, Cleric. Black Redacted. Are you a girl or a guy? It's because one player got bad experiences with older guys, and I don't want her to be uncomfortable. An interesting happenstance. I have not had such an experience before, but I also don't really do a lot of online looking for groups, and I'm also a girl, so I guess that makes it easier for me in some ways, definitely harder in some other ways, but I think this is an interesting topic for discussion. When hearing the words gender profiling, people tend to have quite negative associations. For example, there are plenty of people who still don't want to hire me for certain positions in the scientific field, which is where I work, just because I am a woman. And clearly, women have no business being in science. There's no sandwich making in the lab after all. But here, I think we have less gender profiling and more establishing a boundary. This is something we do in our everyday life all the time. Talk to certain people, avoid other people that make us uncomfortable. Is it a bad thing? Not necessarily. After all, no one will look after you the way you do, and you should owe it to yourself to care for your needs first. In a burning airplane, you put the air mask on yourself first, and then on someone else. The self-care should come first. And if you don't feel comfortable talking with certain people, that's your right. You don't owe your company to anyone, as they do not owe their company to you. Because of this, I can understand an already established group looking out for one of their own when introducing a new person to the group. We all have different life experiences and vulnerabilities, and sometimes our triggers or hiccups make no sense to others. I am glad to see that this group acknowledges the issues faced by one of their members and is trying to be accommodating. I do the same thing in my groups. If we introduce new people, especially people we don't know, we always discuss it as a group and see if people are comfortable with new people being introduced, or particular new people being introduced. On the other hand, I can also see how much this sucks for someone like OP. From the outside perspective, as someone who doesn't know the inner intricacies of this group, the group is essentially saying, you can't play with us if you're a man in your late 20s. Considering the latest trends on social media, which I will not be discussing, this is not a political channel and I'm not even a US native, I can see how this kind of attitude can be disappointing or even upsetting to someone. At least initially, when you receive it. It's always hard to be rejected, even if you don't actually care. That initial, like, oh, we don't want you, is hurtful. Like, I think it should be okay to admit that being rejected hurts. I think on the opposite side of the spectrum, it should also be perfectly alright for the group to say, hey, are you a guy or a girl? Because one of our members had a difficult encounter with a woman recently and we want him to be comfortable. Would it be received in the same positive way that this kind of looking out for a girl would be? I don't know, but I would like to hope that it would, because men also deserve safe spaces as much as the girls do, and in a lot of cases they don't get that as much as girls do, because societal expectations are different for them. I don't support exclusion of anyone based on gender, but I do support protecting your friends and giving them time to heal in a safe environment, even if that means guarding them against new people of a certain category. A commenter very astutely pointed out that if 29 is older to these people, they might be younger adults or even teenagers, in which case you're probably better off finding a different group, OP. I feel very strongly about adults playing with little children. It's most often not a good dynamic, and it ends up being super weird in 9 out of 10 cases that I've seen or read about. I'm not saying that as an actual statistic, just something I've observed. But I would love to hear opinions about this. Like I said, I am not typically sorted out in this profiling by gender because I am a girl, and girls have other difficulties in D&D, but typically not this one, at least not from what I've experienced and heard about. But I would love to hear from people who have experienced this or other types of profiling and what they think of this matter. Is this a horror story? Is this normal? We all have different experiences, and I think we all have a lot to learn from each other in these kinds of different regards. So let me know. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Thank you for listening through to the end. I'm getting into the groove of these videos, getting my recording and editing game together slowly. It's a progress. I'm really enjoying this little project. I'm still trying to get my schedule sorted out for editing and such. I do have a full-time job, and that has been getting in the way lately because deadlines and end-of-year stuff to hand in. Ugh. But one small step at a time. Give this video a like if you feel like it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Comment if you agree or disagree with my comments, or if you have any opinions. I'm always interested in hearing different perspectives from people. Have a good time of day, and I'll catch you all later. Cheerios!